world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
Welcome back to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Wednesday, October 22nd, as you're listening to this. We are in the 22nd day of this government shutdown. Now, there doesn't appear to be any end in sight. Now, Donald Trump, if he were the master negotiator that he likes us to believe, this great businessman, he always touts his book, The Art of the Deal. Even his supporters like to say, well, he's such a master deal maker. When he gets any sort of win, they claim the art of the deal. When he was putting the tariffs on, they were claiming art of the deal and all of this, even though that was going to hurt the American people. You think he would be part of these negotiations, but he's not. He has yet to really do any negotiating. He did meet with Democrats before the shutdown started. They had one meeting. It didn't end up being very productive. And Donald Trump has not met with them since. And he is now saying that Democrats should just end the shutdown. Now, he is refusing to meet with Democrats, but he did meet with congressional Republicans today, and he wants them to end the shutdown. And he says Democrats should just come to the table and agree to fund the government with the current CR that the House has passed. And then they'll discuss everything else after. They'll negotiate then. And that's not how this works. Right now, Democrats are holding a big chunk of the cards. They have leverage to actually negotiate. Once the government is opened back up, the Republicans, they have no reason to negotiate with Democrats here. But Republicans still think they have the upper hand. They don't. The upper hand resides with the Democrats in this. But he wants Democrats to just cave and give in and everything else. This is the 22nd day of this shutdown. It is now the second longest government shutdown in history. And Donald Trump now owns the record for first and second longest government shutdown in history. The first one being 35 days. That happened during his first term. Took so long that they ended up having to swear in the next Congress because of timing after that. And ultimately, it was a different Congress that got a deal going and reopened the government. In fact, I believe Democrats had control of the House of Representatives at that point, and they were the ones to actually facilitate moving the government forward. But Donald Trump wants Democrats to cave, and they're not going to. They have no reason to. Republicans have control of the presidency. They have both chambers of Congress. Republicans could end this shutdown at any point, but they don't want to for a couple of reasons. One, they don't want to gut the filibuster. In part, because they know if they gut the filibuster, it is going to be used against them when they are the minority power. And they could be the minority power as early as 2027, right after the 2026 midterms. January 3rd, 2027 is when that new Congress would take effect, and everybody who won their seats in that new Congress would be sworn in. And Republicans could potentially find themselves in the minority in both the House and the Senate, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Republicans know that they could be in the minority at some point. They're not dumb enough to assume that they are going to be in power for, the next 20 or 30 years. Every election is different, and they could potentially be in the minority in the Senate. I mean, they just got done with 8 years or 4 years of being in the minority in the Senate. So it's not like they have had the majority for a long time over there. I think beyond that, they don't want to gut the filibuster because they do understand exactly how bad what is going to happen when this bill passes, how bad it's going to affect American consumers. One of the big sticking points in this continuing CR is the fact that the Affordable Care Act, those subsidies expire at the end of this year. That is only about 70 days away, probably a little less than now. And when they expire, everybody's insurance is going to go up. Republicans know that that is going to happen. Now, they want the Affordable Care Act to fail. They just don't want the blame for the Affordable Care Act to fail. They have been trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act since the day it was passed. They have been trying to sabotage it since before it was passed by branding it Obamacare, lying about what was exactly going to go on within the Affordable Care Act and a lot of things about it. And they want it to fail so that there is an appetite in this country, so that there's public outcry to get rid of it. And then they don't necessarily have to replace it. Donald Trump ran on a campaign during his first term of repealing and replacing Obamacare. And his entire term, we heard they were 2 weeks away from having an answer, having a health care plan. And they never did. They never brought forward a health care plan. They were never successful in repealing the Affordable Care Act. And now they want to do it again. But again, they don't have plans. Donald Trump said during his debate with Kamala Harris that he has concepts of a health care plan. And sure, they've announced a few things here and there that may help. But while they're talking about doing things like the Trump RX website, which is supposed to make pharmaceuticals cheaper, he's also increasing tariffs on pharmaceuticals and making them more expensive at the same time. So it's not really working. But they want you to believe that they have a health care plan and they are going to be able to replace it. But they don't have anything coming. So if they can defund the Affordable Care Act by not enhancing the subsidies, and this is just continuing extra money that had already been allotted. Now, this is extending what was extended during the COVID period, where they did increase the subsidies slightly because people needed the help. And now that we are heading into another period of economic downturn, thanks in part to Donald Trump and him putting the tariffs on, tariffs off, and him bungling the economy, it wouldn't be a bad idea to extend those subsidies. And now, normally, how they would do these negotiations and how they would handle it would be, Democrats said, let's extend it permanently. Republicans would say, we can give you 2 years or 3 years. Democrats would say, how about 50? Republicans would say, how about 5? And they would meet in the middle, maybe at 10 years, maybe at 8, something like that. They would go back and forth and come up with a term. And then they would move on to the next sticking point. And the next sticking point is the cuts to Medicaid that came about because of the One Big Beautiful Bill. They cut $1 trillion from Medicaid. And I know we're going to see MAGAs in the comments. Before I get to them and get them blocked, but they're going to come out and say things like, they're just giving illegals health care, and that's their talking point. It has nothing to do with undocumented immigrants getting health care. They're not eligible to get health care from federal tax dollars. Now, some states may allow them to get on Medicare, and that would be a state's problem, where it is state taxpayer money that is funding that. But the problem is Republicans have been so good about this messaging that a lot of people don't realize the difference there. That the money for funding anybody who is not a U.S. citizen that ends up on Medicaid, if your state does allow it, is a state problem, and it comes from state money. So take it up with your state representatives, your state legislature, or your governor. But, this is what we got to deal with. And again, when they would be doing these negotiations, Democrats would say, let's put all the money back and maybe an increase in Medicaid spending. And Republicans would say, well, best we can do is maybe extend the cuts out to start 3 years later or something. They would go back and forth and come up with an idea of where they need to be. It'd be somewhere in the middle. And then this bill would ultimately get kicked back to the House of Representatives. They would have to vote on it. And once it's agreed upon, it would get sent to Donald Trump's desk for a signature. Now, what we don't know is if Donald Trump would actually sign it, if the Republicans cave in Congress and agree to something. Now, it sounded like from the remarks he made today when he was talking to congressional Republicans, is that he wants the Democrats to cave without giving in anything on the health care things they are asking for. And the problem is, if they do cave, if Republicans do cave and they come to an agreement, is Donald Trump going to sign it? We don't know. Ultimately, I think the Republicans are going to be the ones to back down. I think they're going to give something, whether it is just enough to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies out till the beginning of the next presidency, and maybe kick the Medicaid cuts down the road till around the start of the next presidency. It wouldn't surprise me if Republicans ultimately get on board for that, and they could even potentially sell Donald Trump on that idea too. Why? Especially with the Medicaid cuts. But why? Well, if they kick the Medicaid cuts to not start until, say, 2029, the beginning of the next presidential term, if the Democrats wouldn't act quickly and get something passed in the meantime, maybe around a presidential veto, or if the new Democratic president that I'm assuming would take office in 29, because I don't see any Republican being able to win in 29, not after Donald Trump wrecks the economy. It would take a very special person to be able to follow Donald Trump up and fix it on the Republican side if they have to remove Donald Trump beforehand. I'll talk about that in a minute. So I just don't see any Republican being able to come in after Donald Trump and fix it in between, if he doesn't make it to the end of his term for whatever reason. But Democrats win in 28, they take over in 29, and I could see Republicans saying, okay, well, let's kick the can down the road to 29. The cuts will start there, so that new president will get the blame even though they didn't pass anything. Republicans are great about setting things up like that. Remember, Donald Trump's tax bill from his first term, the tax cuts for the middle class and the lower classes were temporary, and they started dropping off and going back up gradually in 2021. Why they do that? Well, Joe Biden got the blame for it. It was there so that they knew if they lost the 2020 election that the taxes would go up for the everyday American. But then by doing that, they set up a way where they could extend it if they won in 2020, where they would look like the hero. It was all about making sure the Democrats look bad, and I could see them ultimately getting on board for this kind of an idea. Now, I said something about Donald Trump not making it to the end of his term and a special Republican being able to replace him. Here's the thing. I don't think Donald Trump makes it to the end of his term. If you've been following me for a while, I say that a lot. I just don't think he gets there. I don't know if his health holds up all the way to the end of 2029, January 20th. That is a long ways away, 3.5 years, roughly. He is not in the best of health. We already see issues with his face drooping, him falling asleep in public. He's got the swollen ankles. He's made a couple of trips to Walter Reed where we haven't heard the full story about what is going on with his health. So it would not surprise me if his health goes. Now, ultimately, Republicans may be left with a choice. Now, they have a tough choice if they decide to do something right now. If they decide to burn Donald Trump at any point while he is still mostly cognitive, and I'm going to say cognitive for him, because by relative comparison, we can see he has a lot of issues. However, he's still able to talk. He can mostly form semi-coherent sentences where you ultimately will figure out what he's trying to say, maybe. But the thing is, he can still get his points out there to some degree. And if they try to burn him now, I think he would burn the Republican Party down. They need to hope, if they want to replace him, that something happens where there isn't an option but to replace him. Like the 25th Amendment is really not meant for a president in Donald Trump's current condition, because what is supposed to happen is when they think the president's unfit to continue to be president, that the vice president sends a letter to Congress, and the president would have so many days to respond. I think it's 3. And if he responds, then Congress has to hold a vote on whether or not to remove him. But if he doesn't respond, then until he does, the powers of the president are temporarily transferred to the vice president until some time that the vice president says, hey, he's completely unqualified, he's not getting better, etc. And that might have been in that initial letter. Say Donald Trump potentially had a debilitating stroke where he is left in a vegetative state or a coma, something like that. At his age, it is possible. Then they would say, well, he has no chance of getting better in the near future or potentially ever. We need to remove him. They do. It'd be a no-brainer. I think Democrats would get on board. Because of continuation of government, if anything else, not necessarily to get rid of Donald Trump, but because if Donald Trump is in that kind of a state, Democrats would have to sign off on it just because we need somebody to have the access to the powers of the president. And because that doesn't automatically fall to JD Vance if Donald Trump is actually still with us. Now, if he's not with us and something happens, he chokes on a Big Mac or collapses from a heart attack on stage or something, and he's no longer around, then automatically JD Vance has to take the oath of office. He becomes president. And if they 25th Amendment Donald Trump because he is incapacitated, JD Vance would take the oath of office and become president. Either of those two things could happen, but I just don't see JD Vance, when he becomes president, being the type of person, if he ends up having to take over after Donald Trump is no longer around or no longer capable of being able to fix everything Donald Trump has broke this time around. And he wouldn't be able to do it and keep the Republican base and the Republicans in line, because there's a lot of people that are still okay with what the Republicans are doing that are in his base that he needs to try to win over MAGA. Now, if they try to do it and Donald Trump is in his current state now where he is still mostly cognitive, like I said, for him, he would try to burn the Republicans down. And that would be, a major infight there. He would turn his MAGA base against them, call them all rhinos, leak whatever secrets he has on everybody, and it would be a disaster for Republicans. So they're hoping that he ends up either somehow making it to the end of his term, or if he doesn't, that he ends up getting debilitated to the point where he can't, respond when they say, hey, you can't do the job. The other option would be to impeach and remove him, and that is more designed for high crimes, but that also is something where, like for Donald Trump in the state he's in now, an impeachment would be more of the way to go versus trying to use the 25th Amendment, even though it's more health related, because that's more of what it was meant for. But again, if they try to impeach him, if Republicans do it, and if you see a Republican-led initiative to impeach Donald Trump actually get a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives while they currently have the majority in both houses, I'm going to go out on a limb right here and say, if it happens, I fully expect him to be impeached and removed. I would be surprised if a Republican brings a measure and they allow it to get a vote of the full House of Representatives without having enough votes to pass the House, and without already knowing that they would be removing him in the Senate. But those are some things of what they are looking at for 2028. Potentially, do they need to remove Donald Trump, put JD Vance in there, and try to give JD Vance a chance to at least fix things and run for 28? But we're dealing with the healthcare fight right now. If they do try to kick the can down the road to 28, they might be setting JD Vance up potentially to swoop in and fix things if he would win, but I just don't see him winning. But like I said, I could see them kicking the can down the road to give him something he can fix right off the bat and get a lot of people happy with by extending it out again and trying to set Democrats up in the future. But ultimately, I think Democrats win in 28. No idea who that candidate's going to be. It's way too early to have any sort of serious discussion about that. Now, along with this government shutdown, we have Representative Grijalva of Arizona. She has yet to be sworn in. She has won her election almost a month ago, or almost exactly a month ago. And Mike Johnson is not swearing her in as of yet. Now, he is trying to come up with all sorts of reasons as to why not. And of course, he's trying to call now. He's saying it is the Pelosi principle, that Nancy Pelosi didn't swear in a member of the House who won for like 3 weeks until they came back from a recess. Well, here's the thing, and this is where Republicans fuck up. They don't understand nuance. They don't see the difference in what they're doing. And the difference between what he is calling the Pelosi precedent and now is that when Pat Ryan, a Democrat, won his seat, I don't remember which year, they were out during August, during the annual August recess, and the House was already scheduled to be gone. So they waited until they came back from that recess to swear him in because they weren't going to be doing any business. Right now is during a normal part of the legislative session, and Mike Johnson just keeps canceling weeks of business, saying, "Yeah, we're not doing anything this week. Oh, we had meetings and stuff scheduled. Yeah, we're not doing that right now. We're not doing any of that. We are going to kick the can down the road another week because we want Senate Democrats to sign off on opening the government under what we have already said we're willing to do. We're not going to negotiate at all." Now, with Mike Johnson doing that, what does that mean? Well, he's, like I said, he's trying to, make some equivalency here. Now, I heard that there has now actually been a lawsuit filed by the the Attorney General for Arizona, and they are suing Mike Johnson over not seating this representative. They're going to see if the courts will actually make the Speaker of the House swear in this representative. Now, that may happen. Courts typically don't like to get involved during actual proceedings of Congress and how they run their business, in part because it's considered a co-equal branch. They don't get involved with how they run their business because they don't want Congress to get involved with how the courts run their business. So for now, Representative Grijalva is not being sworn in. But Mike Johnson made it a point today to say, well, it's not because we're not swearing her in because of the Epstein files. When that does pass and they get to 218 signatures, we're going to schedule a vote. I'm not going to block it. That will have a vote on the House floor. And I think that's very telling. He is now saying that they are going to hold a vote. He's just trying to delay that vote for as long as he possibly can. I think they are still hoping that they can get to one of the 4 Republicans that have signed off on that discharge petition so far and get them to, to scratch their name off basically and say, yeah, I'm not signing anymore. Now, multiple House Republicans are calling on Speaker Johnson to stop having them be out of session and for them to come back and hold votes and do work and do business. And with that being said, any one of those that has not already signed off on that discharge petition, any one of them could sign the discharge petition and say, well, we're at 218 now. There's no reason not to swear her in. They could do it. And just because they signed the discharge petition doesn't mean they have to vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files. But Mike Johnson knows exactly what is going to happen when that Epstein file gets a vote on the House floor. And that Republicans are going to have to make a hard choice. I've talked about it before. They can't vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files because Donald Trump is going to be pissed. He has already said any Republican that votes in favor of the discharge petition, any Republican that votes in favor of releasing the files is a rhino. They're hostile to this administration. They need to be primaried, etc. So Republicans have to decide if that's worth it to release the files. But they're hearing in town halls when they do have them that their constituents want the files released. And I've talked about it a lot. I believe that Republican voters are expecting to find nothing but Democratic names in the Epstein files, period. And that there would be nobody but Democrats in there, nobody but liberals. And they want the proof of how bad the liberals and Democrats are so they can run around saying, see, we're right. You guys are all evil. Everybody on the left, you're all evil. That's not what's going to happen when the files are released. One, if there are liberals or Democrats on there, those of us on the left are going to say, hey, you know what? Cool. Charge them. Fullest extent of the law. Oh, we can't charge them? Statute of limitations is up? Well, we're going to make you a pariah. Oh, you're a famous Hollywood actor? Yeah, you're not getting parts anymore. Oh, you're a late night talk show host? Let's just say, yeah, your show's canceled. We're not watching anymore. Whatever the case is, whoever it is, whatever walk of life they come from, we would not support them and take care of it in the court of public opinion, if not the actual court with real charges. But see, Republicans don't think like that. They don't do that. They think we should act like them and defend everybody we like tooth and nail, and that's just not the case. We don't do that. And they are going to be surprised when they open the files up and find out that there are Republicans, including, more than likely, because of how bad he is trying to keep it hidden, Donald Trump. They are doing everything they can to bury the Epstein files, even though Mike Johnson has now said it's going to get a vote whenever they get back in session. Now, ultimately, I think Republicans end up caving on this. I think they come back. I think the government gets opened, and not long after the government gets opened, we have a vote on the Epstein files. And it is going to be an embarrassment to Republicans. It's going to be an embarrassment to this administration. And I think you might potentially see a large number of Republicans that are currently not willing to sign the discharge petition when they are put under fire and they have to go on record of voting, actually vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files so it can't be used in commercials against them, in political ads, etc., as we are getting closer and closer to the start of the primary season leading into the 2026 midterms, especially in the House of Representatives, where they are up for re-election every 2 years. So I think that could happen. And I think you're going to see potentially, if they vote to open the government and cave to Democrats and give in, or they actually vote to release the files and it passes the House, there is a good chance that Mike Johnson ends up not making it as Speaker, that Donald Trump calls in some favors from MAGA and says, hey, go ahead, look at this guy. Let's get rid of him, bring in somebody else, bring in somebody loyal to me. Because Mike Johnson clearly isn't it. He didn't do what I told him. He didn't bury the Epstein files. And then who do they get? That's a good question. I have no idea who could potentially be Speaker of the House at this point. And it could go on for several weeks. And ultimately, they may find somebody who has no intention of wanting to be Speaker, somebody we've never heard of. Or potentially, it could be a Republican that's on their way out the door and who isn't running for re-election, be like, yeah, I'll do it. I've got nothing else to lose. I can be Speaker for a little bit. And it wouldn't take very many Republicans and all Democrats to vote out the Speaker. I've talked about it before. Democrats currently have no reason to save Mike Johnson. They wouldn't necessarily save him because of how he is treating them in this government shutdown fight and with how he is treating Representative Grijalva. And it only takes, I think there's 214 Democrats now with Representative Grijalva. It would only take 4 Republicans to vote in favor of removing the Speaker, and he's gone. So I could see it potentially happening. Now, as we are dealing with this shutdown fight, there's something else going on. We find out that Donald Trump is moving forward with building this ballroom, this 90,000 square foot, 1,000-person capacity ballroom that is going to be about as big as the current White House itself. And Donald Trump swore that it was going to be funded with private funds. No public money was going to be used for it, but they're not releasing any accounting for the build of it yet, as far as where the money is coming from. And to my knowledge, no money has been appropriated through Congress. So I don't know where the funds are coming to do this. And it is entirely possible that Donald Trump is just doing this with promises to pay and figures he'll deal with it like he does a lot of his contracts for building things and not pay them. That's entirely possible. Or he thinks, well, once it's done, what's Congress going to do? Is it going, are they're going to have to start funding on it because we've already broke ground. We've already done things. Like we were told they would only have to cut open a little bit of a walkway to open up to connect to the ballroom. Well, they're actually demolishing part of the East Wing to build this. And this looks awful from what they are doing. Now, there is a capital planning committee or something like that that is in charge of all of the builds of all the historic buildings in the DC Capitol. And in years past, including Donald Trump's last administration, when they wanted to do some renovation work on certain things, they had to get permission from this council in order to do the renovation, in order to do the teardown, in order to do the new build. Well, now this Schraff, I think is his name. I think he's one of Donald Trump's personal executive assistants, has been made head of this council, and he believes or agrees with Donald Trump that this committee doesn't have any control over demolition, just that they need to be consulted for when it comes to new build or renovations after you've torn it down, how you build it back up and fix it, which is a very weird take, if you ask me. You're dealing with very historical buildings, and it doesn't look like there's been a lot of care taken on how they are doing it. They're just using a backhoe and ripping part of the building off. This whole thing looks like it's being done on the cheap. There's not a lot of care being taken to preserve that historical building. I, for one, am pissed that Donald Trump is doing this at all. There's no pushback from Congress at this point. We're not even hearing anything from Democrats, and maybe it's because they're busy right now dealing with this government shutdown, and Donald Trump is using the shutdown as a means to end up doing whatever he wants. So this ballroom is going to be like 90,000 square feet, 1,000-person area. He thinks that they need to have a bigger space in the White House to hold more guests. Here's a couple questions I have. First of all, if he doesn't have the authority, what's going to happen? Congress may have to end up ultimately just funding it and granting the authority because it's already been started. Two, what happens when Donald Trump ends up not making it to the end of his term? They expect it to be done before the end of his administration, but that is an ambitious goal. He wants to be able to use this before his term is over. But getting a 90,000 square foot building done, et cetera, the way they are going and with how they're starting, and getting all of the necessary features in that you would require for something that is now added into the presidential residence is going to take time. So what happens if Donald Trump doesn't make it to the end of his term? Let's say he doesn't make it to the midterms and JD Vance takes over. Does JD Vance finish it? Now, he probably would and try to rename it the Trump Ballroom or something and try to give it some kind of a name like that to commemorate him. But what happens if Donald Trump makes it to the end of his term? I still don't think that's possible, but let's say he does. But it's not finished and a Democrat takes over. Do they finish it? Does it depend how close to finishing it is? Do they just demolish it and get rid of it and rebuild the facade of the White House back to what it was before Trump took over? Any of those are a valid option. I don't know. Now, Donald Trump is saying it is going to be paid for with private donations, and he is personally going to be kicking in some of the money. Well, that's all fine and well, but he's not releasing any information on who's actually donating. And now I have heard, though, that there are a couple of acts going through Congress. At least they are going to be introduced. Now, whether they ever make it out of committee or they end up getting passed, they would have to pass with bipartisan support because Donald Trump would never sign them. One was on making sure taxpayer money doesn't get used, I believe, to fund this. Now, it would not prevent anything from happening as far as making it so he couldn't do this. The other one would prevent Donald Trump from being able to put any sort of permanent naming on the building. Like, because one of the things that was floated potentially was to help pay for it would be like, you know how you go to some places and they have like a commemorative wall where you paid for a brick and now you have your plaque on the brick or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? Something like that, where like, oh, Coca-Cola, donated $1 million and they get a brick, and now you permanently have the Coca-Cola logo inside this ballroom on some kind of wall of fame or something, or wall of donors. And this bill potentially would limit that. But we don't know if this is going to actually pass the U.S. Congress at all. Now, I could see Democrats getting behind this actually, but I don't know what kind of bipartisan support it would have, and they would have to pass it with enough votes to override a veto. So we'll see if it passes and what happens there. But this whole thing about Donald Trump paying for it with private funds doesn't seem quite right, and it doesn't sit well. And it's interesting that they say it's going to have a $230 million price tag. Now, remember that $230 million number. Donald Trump comes out and says, well, we got this $230 million number, et cetera. That's what it's going to cost. Okay. Then a little while later, he announces now he is apparently going to attempt to sue the Department of Justice for $230 million in what he calls damages. And these damages, come from his prosecutions, from when they had Jack Smith investigate him and indict him and take him through the criminal proceedings. Granted, though, they never made it to full trial. The charges ultimately got dropped, not because of lack of evidence or lack of standing to charge him or anything else. It was all because Donald Trump won the November election and became president, which is one of the reasons why he ran. Maybe the main reason that he ran. The other reason was probably to avenge his 2020 loss because he doesn't like being viewed as a loser. But more importantly, he was trying to get out of legal trouble. So now he thinks the Department of Justice owes him $230 million. Weird that it's the same amount as this supposed ballroom. If he does donate private money, is that where he's going to get his private money from? Now, since this is a lawsuit, that you would think this would end up in front of a judge, and it potentially could. Now, other people are reporting that supposedly he is just giving Attorney General Pam Bondi a bill because she heads the DOJ, and it'd be up to her to sign off on it. I don't think that's exactly how that works. I do think this would have to end up in front of a judge, and this may get tossed out ultimately. And I have not seen the actual quote, but some people are saying that Donald Trump's like, oh, weird. This would land on my desk, and I would get the ultimate decision as to whether or not to sign off on it. Well, that seems like a conflict of interest, and I don't think it does end up on his desk. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't, because the DOJ is supposed to be separate from the actual executive branch. Sure, the Attorney General is considered a cabinet level position, and they are appointed and confirmed by the president. But that being said, they are supposed to be completely independent. After Joe Biden appointed Merrick Garland, much to everybody's dismay, he let Merrick Garland go about his business and do everything on his own. He didn't step in. He didn't say, hey, Merrick Garland, why aren't you going after Donald Trump? Where's that investigation at? Are you actually doing anything? No, he let things go like they typically would have been. And it was, nothing happened there. Well, and not until public outcry got loud enough. And then he said, oh, maybe I should appoint a special counsel, and then brought in Jack Smith. But see, Donald Trump doesn't act that way when it comes to the DOJ. Not to mention the fact that the DOJ is run by a lot of the top attorneys in the DOJ are his personal attorneys, or they are people he knows that he has dealt with before, or et cetera. So he is hoping that they will just come up to him and say, Donnie, do you think we should sign off on this settlement? I mean, it is for you, but should we sign off on it? What do you think? And he'll say, yeah, sign off on it. They sign off on it, and supposedly it'll be done. Now, I think this ends up before a judge, and if it does, here's the problem. I could see this happening is it ends up before a judge tosses it, and then Donald Trump trying to appeal this all the way to a Supreme Court. And I don't know if the Supreme Court would end up saying that, yes, the president can sue the DOJ for an amount of money that he decides, and his own hand-picked attorney general can just sign off and say, yeah, that we're gonna pay that settlement and call it good. I don't know that even this Supreme Court would agree to it, because that just means any president at any point can sue the DOJ for any amount of money they decide. What's to stop the next president from saying, yeah, I'm going to sue the DOJ for $3 trillion and go sign off on it? That's ridiculous. And if this was a Democrat, Republicans would be screaming to high heaven about corruption, but we don't hear that in this case. And one of the other things here is, with that, even if this does come to pass, remember, the only way the U.S. government has money is by tax money. So that means that he is trying to move $240 million of taxpayer money to himself. Sure, he's not taking his $400,000 presidential salary. Why do you need $400,000 a year when you can just sue the DOJ for $230 million, $240 million? That's completely ridiculous. It should not be allowed. And I think ultimately a judge, even a Trump-appointed judge, would rule against him. Maybe not Aileen Cannon, but I think she would end up ultimately being the outlier. Now, Donald Trump came out and he was giving remarks about the Insurrection Act. And he said that half of U.S. presidents have invoked it, and he may still invoke it to send the military into liberal cities. And he said that they don't deserve safety. That politicians are coming to him and said that the liberal cities are so violent they don't deserve safety. What does that mean? Okay, if they're so violent and you want to send in the military to make them safer, but you say they don't deserve safety, so you're not sending the military in? That doesn't make any sense. But as far as his comment about half of U.S. presidents have ever invoked the Insurrection Act, that's categorically false. 11 have done it. Most recently was George H.W. Bush during the Rodney King protests in L.A. And those protests got out of hand, and they they invoked the Insurrection Act to send in, I believe it was the National Guard, to maintain peace and actually try to get things under control there. But that was an isolated incident. Then you look back before that, I believe it was LBJ and JFK using the National Guard to help enforce desegregation, and those kind of things. This is not something that would be done to the level of what Donald Trump is trying to say is done. It is nowhere near routine. It is nowhere near 50% of all presidents. Now, 45 people have been president. Donald Trump is number 45. And that is because you don't count Grover Cleveland, who has served 2 non-consecutive terms, and you don't count Donald Trump, who has now served 2 non-consecutive terms, separately, because they are the same person. So we've had 47 different administrations, because it went from Cleveland to, I can't remember who went after him, and then back to Cleveland, and now it went from Trump to Biden to Trump. So you can't do that. But Donald Trump saying he may still invoke the Insurrection Act. Now, ultimately, I think the Insurrection Act, if he does try to invoke it, may be a bridge too far for even Republicans. There's going to be court cases over it if he attempts it, and much like him being able to send in the military into other jurisdictions, the courts are going to probably say, no, you can't do that. Ultimately, it will probably end up in front of the Supreme Court, and this Supreme Court may have no choice but to say the Insurrection Act is not constitutional. I don't know on what grounds, but they may do that. They like to overturn long-standing precedent. And how much longer of a precedent do you need than a law that has been around since George Washington? But anyway, I could see them doing that. Now, we are hearing that Donald Trump, he wanted to send in the military to Portland. And there were 2 separate restraining orders in that case. And apparently his ability to send the military into Portland, and with the one restraining order, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe it was, ruled in a 2-1 decision that he could send the military in, but the other restraining order was still in place. So no, he couldn't until that other restraining order drops. And then he potentially could. However, the way I understand how appellate court jurisdictions work is now that it was only a 2-1 decision, That's only part of the full bank. I believe it is 7 judges on the appellate court. They can actually have the entire appellate court hear this case and they can appeal that before it goes to the Supreme Court. So there could be another appeal to the same court where the rest of the court ends up deciding that no, you can't send the military into Portland. But other jurisdictions are watching this and they are saying, okay, well, what is the court's issues with how they are phrasing things in this case with Portland? And they are trying to navigate around this decision and saying, okay, well, you've got issues with this, so we are going to look at something else and find another justification for how we're doing it, or try to fix the problem that you have with the ruling. And that's part of what judges do a lot is when they have to go back and they're looking at other cases, they have to see, is there ways to make things fit within the scope of other rulings to make sure that they align, that they're issuing rulings the right way, etc. So Donald Trump is yet to be able to send the military into Portland. And I know he's pissed off about that because he wants to send the military in to send some kind of a message. I think he's trying to send it as a show of strength. And he wants everyone to believe that he is this tough guy, he is this big dictator, and he is going to do all of this. Now, ultimately, it's a sign of weakness. He is not a very strong man, not by any stretch of the imagination. If you have to end up terrorizing your citizens by sending in the military, that is not something a strong and powerful leader would do. It is a sign of somebody who is very terrified of losing control and losing their power. He also probably realizes that, his health isn't great, despite what he is saying publicly. I wonder how he feels about his health and if he realizes he is having as many issues as it is apparent to us that he is having, if that isn't part of why he wants to do all of this and he's trying to get as much accomplished before he is out of time. Either way, when he is out of time at the end of his term, at the end of 2028, Republicans don't have a replacement for him. When he is gone, who is going to fill that vacuum? There isn't anybody who can fill that spot for Donald Trump. There's nobody who can capture the hearts and minds of MAGA like Donald Trump. They can't do those kind of things. Now, when they go to replace him in 2028, if he's like he is now, and if he's still thinking that he should have access to a third term, he will probably try to burn down whoever attempts to run against him, saying all kinds of nasty things, etc. The best bet for the Republican Party would be for Donald Trump to not be in any capacity of being able to run in 2028. I know that legally he can't run, but if he even thinks he can, it would not surprise me if he ultimately tries to do something, or if they tell him you can't run, we're not backing your candidacy, etc. If he would try to do something like a third party run, or if he tries to just rail against everybody in the primary and just tank the primary, something like that. And because we talk about his dementia and about how bad his health is, etc., it's entirely possible that he may think this is just like 2020, where he is running for re-election, where in 2020, he was eligible for re-election to run because he'd only served one term. And if his mind is going, he may genuinely believe he has a third term, and Republicans may have to do whatever they can to nominate anybody else if he's still around. I still don't know if he's going to be healthy enough, if he is going to be here in 28. But who do the Republicans have to capture the hearts and minds of MAGA? You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out and kind of sounding like the voice of reason when it comes to this fight over the Affordable Care Act subsidy, saying it needs to happen. But then she comes around and says this at the same time is talking about the Democrats and saying, well, with the government shutdown, we don't have a government-funded Democrat initiative that is altering the weather going on right now, proving she's just as nuts as always. Just with certain things, she has at least a little bit of sanity. Now, the 2028 or 2026 midterms, rather, could potentially go Democrats' way. They have a chance to pick up enough seats. Now, where could they pick up the seats to gain control of the Senate? And I think gaining the Senate is important. Getting the House is just as important for different reasons, because that would be where you control the purse, you control impeachment, et cetera. And there's going to be lots of investigations coming out from the House. But I think it's more of a better bet that the House gets flipped to the Democrats than it is the Senate. But there are some spots, I think, where the Democrats could potentially flip a seat. Maine potentially could be one. You've got Susan Collins, who is running for reelection. Now, she is, I believe, an independent who leans Republican, but she is potentially going to be up against one of a couple of very good candidates, and she potentially could end up losing her seat, which would be a good thing. I have not been a Susan Collins fan. She likes to come out and she'll say when something looks a little shady, well, I have my concerns, and she's always concerned about something, but then turns around and says and still votes in favor of them. Like she was concerned, I believe, about Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, about any of them getting appointed to the Supreme Court, and still voted in favor of them. And numerous other things where she'll come out and she'll say, well, I've got my concerns. I don't know if we should be voting in favor of this, and then still vote lockstep with Republicans. So that's one spot. And then it's North Carolina. I believe Governor Roy Cooper is term limited. He's now running for Senate. Very popular governor. Potentially has a chance to be a pickup there. Here in Iowa, you have Joni Ernst deciding not to run for re-election. Now, the simple fact of the matter is she doesn't want to lose. She may have her eye on other races. She has not entered the race for governor here in Iowa, but she may try to run for other things in politics down the road. And she doesn't want to do that coming off of a loss. So she has decided not to run. And I think part of the reason why she decided not to run is because she made comments like earlier this year at this town hall talking about the Medicaid cuts before they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, where somebody said, well, what are we going to do if I lose my Medicaid? I'm going to die. And she goes, well, we're all going to die anyway. I think she knew there's a few really bad clips of her saying some bad things and decided not to run. So that potentially could be a pickup for the Democrats simply by not having a Republican incumbent. And the tide is shifting here in Iowa. You have Republicans have kind of wrecked things here a little bit. You have a very popular state auditor, Rob Sand, running to be the Democratic nominee for governor. I think there's a good chance he wins the governor race, and he may pull some people across the line with him, in statewide races. So Iowa potentially could be a flip and a pickup. And then you look at a place like Texas. Texas is one where, sure, they have James, I think it's James Cornyn, one of the two. He is their senator down there, but he's being primaried by Ken Paxton. Now, under normal circumstances, Ken Paxton's a fool and potentially would not get the nomination. However, if he does somehow get the nomination and MAGA puts him in as their representative, that would be a dream situation for Democrats in Texas, where Democrats would be unified behind a candidate. Plus, you have the fact that Democrats are potentially able to rally around this redistricting and gerrymandering of Texas. It may piss off enough people that they show up in mass to vote in Texas, and Texas may elect a Democratic senator for the first time in a very long time. And then you have Ohio with Sherrod Brown running again. Now he's running to fill the other seat where for senator, but he had just gotten voted out and didn't win his reelection bid. So he is coming off of a loss, but he was very popular, except for the fact he didn't win because they had a Trump-backed MAGA candidate. Now there's a chance that with as bad as things are, he potentially could get reelected and go back to the Senate. And if all four of those races, and there's probably others I'm not thinking of right now, if all of them flip, well, that is 4 seats. Democrats need to flip 4 seats and hold the rest where they are defending incumbents. And then that means they have control of the Senate. And if they get control of the Senate, then Donald Trump would have to be very, very worried. Because if Democrats have control of both chambers, Donald Trump gets nothing done. Absolutely nothing done. Now, if Democrats only get the House, he's still not getting anything legislatively done, but they could use a 50-50 split or a 51-49 split or something like that in the Senate to still bump through a bunch of nominees and get a lot of things done that way. But if the Democrats hold the Senate or they take over again, then it is going to be very hard for Donald Trump to get anybody appointed to any position, especially anybody crazy MAGA. They would have to be normal, middle of the road, non-objectionable, non-partisan, almost very moderate for Democrats to sign off if they have control of the Senate. And speaking of somebody who needs Senate confirmation, now I can't think of this guy's exact name, doesn't entirely matter, but he was up to be head of the Office of Special Counsel. I think it was Eisenhoff or something like that. Anyway, doesn't matter. Not entirely. He was appointed to be head of the Office of Special Counsel. He'd barely gotten his law license, had no real experience being a lawyer, but he was a Trump loyalist. And he was still being going through the confirmation process, and they hadn't voted on him yet, and something came to light. Apparently, he had been part of some text messages where he talked about being a racist. He said that the Martin Luther King holiday should be tossed into the ninth circle of hell. And he admitted to having some Nazi ideologies or Nazi tendencies. And there were some Republican senators who said, yeah, we can't vote for him. Well, apparently the math got bad enough that he has officially decided that it is not worth attempting to go forward anymore, and he has withdrawn his name from consideration for that proposal. And why would you even accept it knowing you have that kind of stuff in your past, except for the fact that you thought for sure, with the way the Republican Party currently is, that you would be welcome with open arms. And I think if that stuff hadn't come to the light of day, that probably would have been the case, is that they would have accepted his nomination and then been surprised if it came to light later. I mean, look what happened with that Young Republicans group text that came out where they talked about a lot of racist things. They had racist dog whistles supporting Nazi Germany and talking about using gas chambers to go after Democrats and their political enemies and things like that. And our sitting vice president basically ignored it and waved his hands over it and said, well, it's just kids being kids. It's boys will be boys. It's locker room talk, that kind of thing. So maybe he thought he would be safe among them. And then when he realized that he wasn't, he said, okay, I'm backing out. Which is a good sign. I wish more of Donald Trump's horrible appointees would have done the same thing. And the reason he's putting up people like this dumbass who has, Nazi tendencies and has said some very horrible racist, etc. things is because reasonable people do not want to be associated with Donald Trump. They saw the writing on the wall after his first administration. A big chunk of his nominees were either they ended up having to quit in disgust, they were fired, or they ended up getting through it and they were facing criminal prosecutions. Beyond that, they were disgusted with how he handled January 6th, etc. He's caused a lot of reasonable Republicans to leave the party or to leave politics altogether. I mean, not that I was necessarily a Liz Cheney fan, but he attacked Liz Cheney so bad to not only did she, I believe, leave politics, but she turned around and endorsed Kamala Harris for president and helped campaign for her. Now, it ultimately did not help Kamala Harris, but he pissed her off and went after her so hard that she had to not only leave politics, but turn around and she campaigned with and helped promote his opponent in the 2024 election. And that's what Donald Trump does to the Republican Party. That's why I say if he if they have to remove him ahead of 2028 or 2029 when his term is over, rather, he would try to burn the party down because he would feel they are disloyal to him. And that would be the biggest betrayal. He wouldn't want to deal with that. So that's all I've got for you today. That's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast. I'll be back with you tomorrow because there's always something going on in the world of politics.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.